Each dot is one person gone. When enough dots appear, the map is complete. In the cold storage room, a brown-covered notebook lay among the evidence bags. The yellowed pages, each line perfectly aligned. Name, date, code. A map folded into quarters, red ink connecting points like a chain of wounds on the land. At the bottom of the page, an unfinished blank space, as if waiting for a new name. They were not confessions. They were a way for the owner to remind himself that the list had never ended, but this notebook was only one of many. In Colombia, one man drew maps from memory, marking the places he had passed through. In the United States, another kept hundreds of photographs and a list of strangely repeated names. Some sent maps to newspaper offices as an invitation leading to something no one wanted to find. All of them kept records, not to assist the police, but as if building a structure only they understood. He appeared in small towns as a traveling salesman, sometimes a temporary handyman, sometimes simply a stranger asking for directions. The cloth bag he carried was always full, but no one noticed. Inside, aside from a few sets of clothes, there was always a small notebook and several folded sheets of paper. On the surface, no one thought he was watching anyone. But the children in town seemed to sense the excessive friendliness, the offers of candy, the repeated questions about shortcuts to the outskirts. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos was born in 1957 in Quindío, Colombia. His childhood was marked by domestic violence, early school dropout, and wandering the streets. He learned how to start conversations, how to make others feel trust with only a few sentences. As an adult, Garavito moved constantly between rural areas and small towns, making a living as a street vendor, sometimes doing minor repairs. No one knew that at every place he stopped, he marked it in his memory and on paper. He selected targets carefully. Boys between the ages of 6 and 16, often homeless children, street laborers, or those living in difficult circumstances. He lured them with promises of gifts, food, or light work. He led them to abandoned lots, banana plantations, grass fields far from residential areas. There, Garavito carried out his acts, then left the body behind, disappearing before anyone could notice. Each time, he wrote a symbol in his notebook, sometimes a date, sometimes only a number, and marked the location on the folded map. For years, disappearances were scattered across Colombia. There was no clear connection. Each town knew only one or two cases, and local police assumed they were accidents or children running away. Only when an inter-regional investigation team reviewed the records did they see a pattern. Same age range, same circumstances, same type of disappearance, and notably, many incidents spaced exactly the same amount of time apart. In 1999, in the outskirts of the city of Pereira, a group of hikers came across the remains of children on a hillside. Police cordoned off the area and found additional burial sites scattered within a radius of several kilometers. At one of these locations, they recovered an empty liquor bottle, several rolls of tape, torn clothing, and a folded sheet of paper containing a hand-drawn map. The map marked footpaths and several red dots. During the investigation, police traced witnesses who had seen a middle-aged man with boys in the area. He was identified at a small shop where he had used a false name to make purchases. When arrested, Garavito did not resist. At headquarters, he requested a cup of coffee, then sat down and opened the notebook taken from his bag, as if he wanted them to see it. In his statement, he began recounting each incident, pointing to locations on the map. He referred to them as work notes. On some pages, instead of names, he recorded only personal symbols without explanation. When asked about the number of victims, Garavito listed over 140 cases, though police confirmed just over 100. Many of the red dots on the map had not yet been excavated or matched to missing persons reports. The trial was quiet. Colombian law at the time did not permit the death penalty, and the maximum sentence for multiple convictions was 40 years. But through certain provisions for cooperation, Garavito's sentence could be reduced significantly. His composure throughout the proceedings kept the courtroom in complete silence. When the prosecutor read the names of the victims, he only looked down at his notebook, occasionally giving a slight nod. Garavito remains in prison, his medical file indicating declining health, but his map and notebook remain in the evidence archive, preserved as part of the case. Investigators occasionally open them, cross-checking with older missing persons reports. Many red dots have never been verified and may remain empty spaces. On the map, the connecting lines are still visible, like a chain of dried blood strokes across the land. At the end, a few blank spaces remain, the ink stopping mid-line. No one knows whether he had no time to add more or left them for those who were never found. Garavito's red dots are sealed inside an evidence envelope. In California, another man did not mark with a map. He chose to list, each line of names aligned, the handwriting consistent, without a single misspaced gap, each name sharing the same initial for first and last name, alongside hurried snapshots, a smile, a head of hair, a glance, all kept as part of a collection. None of them knew they had been entered onto a list. Joseph Naso lived alone in a small house in the suburbs of Reno, Nevada. Neighbors knew him as an elderly private man, sometimes seen pushing a shopping cart full of groceries back home. In the past, Naso had worked as a freelance photographer, roaming across California and Nevada, taking portraits of strangers to sell for money. He often told people he liked to hold on to beautiful moments. In reality, those moments were kept in another way. Inside his home, cardboard boxes were neatly stacked in a wooden cabinet. Each box contained dozens of photographs, most of them women, taken at close range, some outdoors, some in dim rooms lit by a single ceiling bulb. A few smiled, a few turned away. None of them knew they had been placed on another list. That list was written in a hardcover notebook, hidden deep in a drawer. The lines were evenly ruled, each line a single name. Strangely, many of the names had both first and last names beginning with the same letter. Police would later call it the double initial list. Besides some names were dates, Beside others, only a dash. No explanation was given. Naso was born in 1934, grew up in New York, served in the military, then moved to California. He lived a closed-off life, had few friends, and often traveled alone by car, bringing his camera. On these trips, he approached women, many of them sex workers or women living alone, offering to take their photographs or promising to help them find work. Afterward, they disappeared. For nearly 2 decades, from 1977 to 1994, the bodies of several women were found in remote areas along California. The victims were all fully clothed, some bound with nylon cord. No one connected the cases until many years later. In 2010, while Naso was on probation for a shoplifting charge, a probation officer visited his home and discovered hundreds of photographs of women, along with the notebook containing the double initial list. Some of the names matched unsolved homicide victims in California. Among them were Roxane Rogash and Carmen Colon, names identical to victims in the well-known double initial murders in New York years earlier, though unrelated directly. The expanded investigation found Naso's DNA matched samples from several crime scenes. He was arrested in April 2011. In questioning, Naso denied killing anyone, claiming the list was personal notes and the photographs were an art collection. But as investigators compared victim photographs with the list, the gaps began to close. The 2013 trial lasted several weeks. Prosecutors displayed numerous photographs of victims taken shortly before death and read each name from the list aloud. Naso sat still, occasionally giving a faint chuckle when asked about the list's meaning. He represented himself in court, maintaining a calm tone. When asked why so many people on the list had died, he replied, "People die every day. That's not my fault." The jury convicted Naso of 4 counts of first-degree homicide, sentencing him to life without parole. Even so, his list contained more than 10 other names police have not been able to confirm. Among the photographs seized, many faces have never been identified. Today, Joseph Naso's notebook is sealed in an evidence storage room in California, placed beside the box of photographs. Whenever an old case is reopened, investigators cross-check the names in the list, hoping to find a lead. But many remain empty entries, only handwriting on paper with no address, no dates, no explanation. Outside the prison, the case maps still hang on the walls of the investigation room, photographs of victims pinned next to matching initials. Between those photographs, many spaces remain, as if waiting to be filled. Naso's notebook is closed, placed back into the evidence cabinet, next to the box of unidentified photographs. But in Missouri, another man kept no written notes and no photographs. He sent maps directly to outsiders, not to friends, not to police, but to a newspaper office. On them, the markings looked as though they led to treasure. Except at each destination, there was something no one wanted to imagine. In the town of Ferguson, on the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri, Maury Travis lived in a 2-story brick house with a neatly cut lawn and a dust-free porch. Neighbors knew him as a server at a local casino. Quiet, never causing disturbance. They did not know that in the basement of that house, there was a wooden chair bolted to the floor and ropes hanging from the ceiling. Travis was born in 1965, raised in St. Louis. An ordinary childhood, high school, basketball. After a short time in the military, he returned to take odd jobs and lived alone. Outwardly, he was no different from thousands of other middle-aged men in the area. Privately, he began a routine, approaching women, many of them sex workers, driving them to his home, then making them part of his personal project. He recorded everything with a video camera. In the tapes later recovered, police saw him ask the victim's name, order them to speak it aloud, then bind them to the chair. He carried out his actions, sometimes speaking while looking directly into the lens. When finished, he stored the tape in a wooden cabinet. No one but him was allowed to watch them again. In 2001, a series of disappearances and homicides in St. Louis began to draw attention. The victims were all women, found in remote areas, by the riverbank, in vacant lots. No one connected the cases until a reporter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch received an anonymous envelope in May 2002. Inside was a typed letter and an internet-printed map. On the map, several locations were marked with an X. The letter suggested that by following these points, the reporter would find something interesting. The newspaper forwarded it immediately to police. Technical analysis showed the map had been printed from a computer with an IP address registered to a local internet service subscriber. From there, they traced it to the address of Maury Travis. On June 7, 2002, police arrived at his house with a search warrant. In the basement, they found the wooden chair, restraints, tape, and multiple VHS cassettes. When played back, investigators realized these were not just evidence from a single crime, but a visual record of multiple offenses. Each tape contained several different segments, with the victims changing over time. Travis was arrested that same night. In interrogation, he kept an even tone, denied killing anyone, and claimed the tapes were only consensual games. When asked about the map, he smiled and said, "I wanted to see how many you could find." He gave no explanation for the number of X marks, nor confirmed that they were all accounted for. Less than a week later, while in federal custody, Travis was found hanging from a bedsheet. He left behind a brief note. "Don't want to go on anymore. No confession, no list. Only the tapes and the map remained." The investigation later linked Travis to at least 12 cases, though authorities believed the actual number to be much higher. Some X marks on the map were never examined, either due to remote locations or altered terrain. Many of the victims seen on the tapes have never been identified. Today, the map Travis sent remains in the case file. Its red circles faded. Each time it is opened, investigators are faced with the same question: how many marks will still lead to somewhere no one wants to find? The two-story brick house in Ferguson was sold, its basement converted into a storage room. The new owner avoids mention of its past. But for those who once held that map, who looked at the X marks, the image of the old basement remains. and the wooden chair is still there, in memory. Maury Travis's map is folded away, the red marks fading with the years. But in Colorado, another man needed no marks. He spoke. Each case, each detail, more than any record had ever contained. The number of crimes he claimed far exceeded what police could believe. Between truth and performance, no one knew where the line lay. Only that, if what he said was true, the list would never end. Robert Charles Brown lived quietly in Colorado Springs, in a ground-floor apartment with curtains always drawn. Neighbors knew him as a reserved man, sometimes exchanging greetings, never inviting anyone inside. Born in 1952 in Texas, Brown had an ordinary childhood, served in the military, then left early. He worked various labor jobs across the southern and western United States. Immigration and employment records showed he had moved through more than a dozen states over 2 decades, never staying in one place for long. He kept no maps, no photographs, only memory. And when he decided to speak, he turned that memory into a list no one expected. In 1994, police in Colorado Springs investigated the disappearance of Heather Dawn Church, 13, abducted from her home and later found dead in a remote area. At the scene, they recovered fingerprints that matched no criminal records in the state. Years later, when Brown was arrested in Louisiana for assault, his prints were finally matched. In 2002, after being convicted of Heather's murder, Brown unexpectedly asked to speak with investigators. In the interview room, without prompting or maps, he began to recount other cases. He listed names, locations, and time frames spanning from 1970 to the mid-1990s. Many were unsolved. Some had never even been reported. When asked how many crimes he was confessing to, Brown replied, "More than you want to hear." His statements led police to several matches. A woman strangled in Texas. A victim shot in Arkansas. Bodies found in Louisiana, Mississippi, New Mexico. But there were also cases for which no evidence was ever found. In an even voice, Brown described each encounter. Often strangers he met in bars, at gas stations, or along highways. He spoke of taking them away from populated areas and leaving them in places that, in his words, no one would find unless they knew exactly where to look. Investigators recorded every detail, cross-referencing with missing persons files. But many locations he named had been completely altered. Vacant land turned to housing developments. Forests cleared, trails closed. Gradually, they realized there was no clear division between fact and embellishment. Some believed Brown enjoyed controlling the flow of information, deliberately mixing truth and fabrication to keep himself in public focus. In 2003, Brown pleaded guilty to the murder of Heather Church and another case in Colorado, receiving life without parole. But the list he spoke aloud was estimated to contain more than 40 names. Only a fraction have been verified. The rest remain in the gap between official files and the account of a man whose truth exists only when he chooses to speak it. Today, Brown remains in a Colorado state prison, in declining health, rarely speaking to the press. His case file grows not through new evidence, but through the rare occasions when he agrees to describe another crime, then falls silent for years. Investigators keep a separate list of names he has mentioned, typed and clipped inside a gray file folder. Many lines remain empty, just as he has left his own story, unfinished, ambiguous, and with no one knowing when or if the final answer will ever come. Brown's list ended with a few blank lines clipped inside a gray case folder. In Louisiana, there was no list, no account. Only rural roads cutting through marshland, where the repetition of traces formed a map in the minds of investigators. A man lived quietly there, stepping out of his home each night, returning as daylight broke. Each trip left another gap in the community. Ronald Joseph Dominique lived in a mobile home park in the town of Houma, Louisiana. The road leading into the park was narrow and quiet, flanked by low grass and faded wooden fences. He was known as a slightly overweight, middle-aged man who rode his bicycle around town, did odd jobs, and sometimes sang karaoke at a local bar. No one thought his nightly outings coincided, in a strange way, with a series of disappearances that spanned nearly a decade. Born in 1964 in Thibodaux, Louisiana, Dominique had a quiet, unremarkable childhood. At school, he was bullied for his appearance and reserved nature. After leaving college, he worked a variety of jobs: shipyard laborer, store clerk, short-haul truck driver. Although he lived alone in the mobile home park, he maintained a polite demeanor with neighbors and drew little attention. From 1997, disappearances began to occur in towns along the Louisiana Bayou. The victims were mostly young men, many of them homeless or living on the margins of society. There was no clear link, except that their bodies were often found in remote areas: roadside grass, canals, levees far from residential zones. The cause of death was usually asphyxiation, but the scenes yielded little evidence. It took years for police to detect a pattern of movement. The incidents spanned multiple parishes, but most were within a few dozen kilometers of Houma. Along routes Dominique regularly cycled or drove. By combining data from different police departments, investigators saw that the crimes often occurred after an unidentified man approached a victim, offering a place to stay or money. The turning point came in 2006, when a witness recalled being invited home by a man but declining at the last moment. The description matched that given by several people who had encountered Dominique. Police placed him under surveillance and observed him approaching individuals in parks and bars, engaging in brief conversation, then leaving with them. When summoned for questioning, Dominique initially denied involvement. After several hours, he began to describe, in an even voice, without emphasis, how he approached victims, brought them to his mobile home, and waited until the street outside was silent before acting. He said there was no personal grudge, only that he didn't want to be alone and didn't know how to stop. At no point in his statement did he mention guilt. Police confirmed his admissions matched at least 23 cases, making him one of the most prolific killers in Louisiana's history. Most victims were from vulnerable, overlooked groups, and many cases had not been thoroughly investigated when they first occurred. The 2008 trial was brief. Dominique pled guilty to avoid the death penalty, receiving life imprisonment without parole. In court, he kept his head down as the victims' names were read, showing no reaction when their relatives spoke. As he left the courtroom, he said only, "I was tired of running." Today, Dominique remains in a Louisiana state prison. The roads he once traveled, from Houma to the bayou towns, still exist, winding through sugarcane fields and stretches of marsh grass. For police, his movements form a closed circle around the Gulf region, each stop a case now filed away. But, like the blank spaces in the lists kept by others, there are still points unmarked, and no one knows if they belong to Ronald Dominique. On windless nights, rural Louisiana roads are so dark that only the distant glow of headlights is visible. Along those roads, for nearly a decade, there was a car moving slowly forward, stopping at the roadside, and a figure stepping out, returning only when daylight came, carrying with it another absence no one noticed until it was too late. From the map with red dots, the double initial list, the map sent to a newsroom, to the confession longer than the official file. All were ways these men kept record of their work. They did not write to remember. They wrote to ensure no one would forget. The empty spaces on paper, the marks left unmade, the names left uncrossed. They may not be meant for a stranger. They could be meant for anyone, someone met by chance, or watched for a long time. And the truth is, there is no list in front of you to tell whether your name is on it. There is only one way not to become an unfinished line. Never believe you are too ordinary to be noticed. If any detail has stayed with you, leave it in the comments. And if you want to keep opening files never before revealed, subscribe, so that when a new page is written, you will be the first to know.